but Cowboy waited for his mail-order bride. But an outlaw woman arrived with a gun. The sun rose slowly over the vast prairie, spreading a warm golden light across the rolling hills. Jack Thompson stood outside his small wooden cabin, squinting at the horizon. The air smelled of dried grass and earth, and the distant sound of cattle lowing filled the quiet morning. Jack was a tall, sturdy man in his 30s, with a sun-baked face and hands hardened by years of hard work. His life was simple, yet lonely, and he often felt the weight of isolation pressing down on him. Ever since he had inherited the ranch from his father, Jack had poured all his energy into the land and the animals. Each day began before sunrise and ended long after the sun had disappeared behind the hills. He fed the cattle, mended fences, repaired broken equipment, and rode out on long, dusty trails to check on the herd. Life on the prairie was beautiful in its own way, but it was also demanding. There were no neighbors close by, no towns within easy reach, and very few people to talk to. Jack often wished for companionship, someone to share his meals with, someone to talk to in the quiet evenings when the prairie felt endless and empty. One evening after a long day of herding, Jack sat by the fire outside his cabin, watching the sparks rise into the dark sky. He thought about the letters he had written to the mail-order bride service. He had spent hours carefully choosing his words, describing his life on the ranch, the hard work he did, and his longing for a partner. He wanted a woman who could understand the harsh realities of prairie life, someone strong, kind, and willing to face the challenges of the frontier. Jack had imagined her many times, her gentle smile, her quiet voice, and the way she would make the cabin feel like home. Breaks, and weeks turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Jack checked the mail every morning with hopeful anticipation. Sometimes he received letters from the bride service with news of women willing to correspond, and sometimes there was only the usual delivery of bills and advertisements. Each time he read a letter, he felt a flicker of excitement. He would imagine what she looked like, what her voice sounded like, and how it would feel to finally have someone waiting for him when he returned from the fields. The town nearby was small but lively, filled with people who knew each other and shared news over coffee or at the general store. The neighbors often spoke of Jack and his search for a bride, Bill. Some teased him good-naturedly, joking that the prairie was too wild for a woman to handle, while others sincerely hoped he would find someone. Jack appreciated their support, though he often felt embarrassed by the attention. The thought of a stranger arriving at his cabin made him nervous, but he tried to focus on the possibility of finding love. One particular morning, Jack saddled his horse early and rode out to check the farthest corners of the ranch. The wind blew gently across the open land, carrying the scent of wildflowers and fresh grass. He stopped for a moment on a hilltop and looked out at the endless prairie. The sight was breathtaking, with hills rolling endlessly into the distance, dotted with patches of trees and the occasional herd of grazing cattle. Jack loved this land. It was his home, his responsibility, and his sanctuary. But yet in moments like this, he felt the sharp pang of loneliness. He longed for someone to share this beauty with, someone to walk beside him and see the world through his eyes. As he rode back toward the cabin, Jack thought again about the letters he had sent and received. There was one woman he had corresponded with for months, a woman named Lila Kane. Her letters were bold, honest, and full of personality. Unlike some of the other women he had written to, Lila did not shy away from describing her life or her dreams. She had grown up on the edge of the frontier, and her words hinted at a strong, independent spirit. Round, in desperate, Jack found himself smiling as he read her letters over and over, imagining her laughter and the glint of determination in her eyes. Jack knew that the life they would share would not be easy. The prairie demanded hard work and resilience. Winters were long and harsh, summers hot and dry, and the threat of storms, wild animals, or rustlers always loomed. Yet he felt a strange sense of hope whenever he thought of Lila. He imagined her arriving at the cabin, stepping down from a carriage or wagon, carrying a few belongings and a heart full of courage. He pictured her eyes meeting his, and he wondered what she would think of the vast open land that he called home. Back at the cabin, Jack went about his daily chores, tending to the animals and repairing the fences that had been damaged by the recent windstorm. He worked from sunrise to sunset, moving methodically from one task to another. The work was tiring, but it also brought a sense of satisfaction. There was a rhythm to ranch life, a balance between effort and reward, and Jack found comfort in the routines. Still, as the evening approached, he felt the familiar ache of solitude settle over him. A fire crackled in the hearth, and shadows danced across the wooden walls of the cabin. Jack poured himself a cup of coffee and sat in the rocking chair by the window, gazing out at the darkening prairie. It was during moments like these that he allowed his imagination to wander. He pictured the life he and Lila could build together. He imagined mornings spent cooking breakfast side by side, afternoons riding through the fields to check on the herd, and evenings talking by the fire, sharing stories, hopes, and dreams. The idea of companionship filled him with warmth, and he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Maybe, he thought, just maybe, life could be brighter, fuller, and richer with someone by his side. The days passed slowly, each one blending into the next. Jack continued his work on the ranch, maintaining the fences, feeding the animals, and riding out to distant pastures. He kept his letters neatly stacked on the kitchen table, reading them whenever he felt the sting of loneliness. His neighbors continued their friendly gossip, occasionally stopping by to chat or offer advice. Despite the isolation, Jack found comfort in the simple pleasures of prairie life, the sound of the wind through the tall grass, the warmth of the sun on his face, and the quiet companionship of the animals he cared for so diligently. Then, one morning, a distant sound broke the usual quiet. A wagon approached along the dusty trail that led to the cabin. Round, in desperation. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Could it be her? He tightened his grip on the reins and urged his horse forward, his mind racing with possibilities. The prairie stretched endlessly around him, but the sight of the wagon brought a surge of anticipation. He imagined stepping forward to greet her, imagining the moment when their eyes would meet for the first time. Jack's pulse quickened as the wagon came closer. He noticed a figure sitting tall and confident, a woman whose posture and manner suggested strength and independence. She was not the delicate, timid woman he had pictured in his letters, but there was something compelling about her presence. His mind raced with questions and curiosity. Who was she really? What kind of life had she lived before arriving here? And most importantly, could they find a way to build a future together on this lonely, beautiful prairie? As the wagon finally reached the cabin, Jack dismounted, his heart pounding. He stepped forward, unsure of what to say or how to act. The woman, Lila Kane, stepped down with a bold, unwavering confidence, her eyes meeting his with a sharp intensity. For a moment, neither spoke. The prairie seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the encounter to unfold. Jack realized that this meeting was the beginning of something unpredictable, something that would test both their courage and their hearts. And so, in the quiet of the prairie, with the wind whispering through the grass and the sun casting long shadows across the land, Jack Thompson faced the arrival of a woman who was unlike anyone he had imagined. The letters had prepared him for hope, but reality brought something entirely new. A challenge, a mystery, and the promise of a story that was just beginning. Jack knew that life on the prairie was about to change forever, and that the days ahead would test every ounce of his strength, patience, and heart. The day had been hot, with the sun blazing down over the wide prairie, when Jack Thompson heard the sound of wheels creaking on the dusty trail. He had been repairing a fence along the far edge of his property, sweat pouring down his back, when the sound made him pause. Instinctively, he wiped his hands on his worn trousers and looked toward the trail. A covered wagon was slowly making its way toward his ranch, and for a moment his heart skipped a beat. Could this finally be the arrival he had been waiting for? As the wagon drew closer, Jack noticed the figure seated inside. Best. At first he thought it might be a gentle, timid woman, the kind he had imagined from the letters. But the moment the wagon door opened, his expectations were completely upended. A tall, confident woman stepped down with a fluid motion that spoke of experience and strength. Her eyes, sharp and steady, met his immediately. She carried herself with a boldness that made Jack step back slightly, unsure how to react. There was no hesitation in her movements, no hint of fear or nervousness. "Are you Jack Thompson?" she asked, her voice clear and firm. She had a calm authority that seemed to fill the empty space around the cabin. Jack nodded, surprised that she already seemed so certain of herself. The woman reached for the strap at her side and revealed a pistol holstered neatly against her hip. His eyes widened slightly, but before he could say anything, she added with a grin, "Don't worry. I'm not planning trouble unless someone causes it." Jack swallowed hard and rubbed the back of his neck. This was nothing like the gentle, quiet bride he had imagined when he sent letters through the mail-order service. Yet, there was something compelling about her. Her boldness, her confidence, and the spark of daring in her eyes made it clear that she was someone who would survive the hardships of the prairie with strength, not fear. Slowly, he extended a hand. I'm Jack, he said, trying to mask his surprise with a polite smile. "I'm Lila Kane," she replied, shaking his hand firmly. "I'm here to stay if you'll have me." Her voice carried a hint of mischief, a challenge wrapped in politeness. Jack hesitated for a moment, glancing at the wagon behind her. He could see the few belongings she had brought, simple things, but packed with care. There was a small chest, a bundle of clothes, and a leather satchel.
Lila carried herself as if the world were her home, confident in her ability to handle whatever came her way.
The neighbors, who had been watching from a distance, began whispering among themselves. A few of them had recognized the name Kane and remembered stories of her family, known for their outlaw connections. Some shook their heads, predicting trouble for Jack, while others were secretly intrigued by the fiery woman who had arrived unannounced. Jack, however, could only focus on the present, on the woman standing before him, and on the realization that his life was about to change in ways he could not yet understand. Lila quickly assessed the ranch, her eyes sweeping over the fences, the barn, and the grazing cattle.
"You done a good job keeping this place," she remarked, nodding approvingly. Jack felt a flicker of pride.
Compliments from her were rare and sincere, unlike the polite but distant letters he had received from other women. There was no pretense in her words, no false flattery, just honesty and recognition. As they walked toward the cabin, Jack tried to imagine what it would be like to live with Lila. The thought was both exciting and intimidating. She was strong-willed, fearless, and completely unlike any woman he had ever known. But there was also a spark of curiosity, a sense of adventure that drew him in. He wondered how their days would unfold, how they would work together to manage the ranch, and how she would fit into the quiet rhythm of prairie life. Inside the cabin, Lila set down her belongings and began organizing them with precision.
She unpacked a few clothes, arranged them neatly, and stored her small chest in a corner. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, and confident.
Jack watched her with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. He realized that she would not simply adapt to his world, she would reshape it with her presence. The thought was both thrilling and unnerving. Over the next few days, Jack and Lila began to navigate the challenges of living together. Lila had grown up on the frontier, and her experience was evident in the way she handled herself. She rode like a cowboy, her movements smooth and practiced. She could shoot accurately and quickly, and she knew how to handle the animals without hesitation. Jack found himself learning from her as much as teaching her. He showed her how to mend fences, care for the cattle, and manage the daily chores, while she taught him strategies for self-defense and handling unexpected dangers on the prairie. Despite their differences, a mutual respect began to develop between them. Jack admired her courage, her quick thinking, and her determination. Lila, in turn, recognized Jack's reliability, his kindness, and the quiet strength that had allowed him to survive and thrive in the isolation of the prairie. Slowly, the walls of uncertainty began to crumble, replaced by a growing sense of trust and understanding.
Their interactions were not without tension.
There were moments of disagreement, of frustration, when their personalities clashed. Lila's boldness sometimes challenged Jack's careful approach, and Jack's caution occasionally frustrated her. Yet each disagreement was followed by compromise and understanding. They discovered that their differences, rather than dividing them, could complement one another if they were willing to learn and adapt. One afternoon, as they rode out to check on the cattle near a distant stream, a sudden commotion startled them. A herd of cattle had broken through a fence on a neighboring property and was heading toward the river.
Without hesitation, Lila sprang into action. She expertly guided the cattle back toward the correct pasture, her confidence and skill on full display.
Jack watched, impressed by her decisiveness and bravery. He realized that her strength was not just physical. It was the courage to act when circumstances demanded it, the ability to face challenges head-on, without hesitation. Panting, the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jack and Lila sat by the fire outside the cabin. The day had been long and exhausting, but also rewarding. They shared a simple meal of bread, beans, and roasted meat, talking quietly as the stars began to appear overhead. Jack felt a growing sense of connection with Lila, a bond forged through shared labor, mutual respect, and the small moments of laughter and conversation that softened the edges of their demanding lives. Lila spoke of her past, revealing snippets of her life and the lessons she had learned. She told Jack about her family, their struggles, and the adventures she had experienced before arriving at the ranch. Her stories were full of courage, wit, and a touch of humor, painting a vivid picture of a life lived boldly and without fear. Jack listened intently, captivated by her words and the spark of life they contained. As the fire crackled and the night settled over the prairie, Jack realized that his imagination had been limited by the letters he had received. He had pictured a gentle, quiet woman, but Lila was something entirely different. She was fearless, independent, and capable. Yet there was warmth beneath her bold exterior. She had arrived with a gun, yes, but also with a heart capable of loyalty, trust, and perhaps even love. The following days were filled with routine and discovery. Jack and Lila worked together to repair fences, care for the cattle, and maintain the ranch. They learned each other's habits, preferences, and strengths. Jack discovered that Lila had a knack for problem-solving and could anticipate challenges before they arose. Lila found that Jack's steady hand and thoughtful approach balanced her impulsive nature. Together they formed a partnership that was as practical as it was unexpected. Some skeptical, others curious, and a few genuinely impressed. Jack had brought Lila to the ranch expecting a quiet companion, but instead he had received a partner who could face the harsh realities of prairie life alongside him. The ranch became a place of shared effort, where the strengths of both individuals combined to create a home that was resilient, lively, and full of possibility.
By the end of the first week, Jack understood that life with Lila would not be easy, but it would never be boring.
She was a challenge, a mystery, and a source of inspiration. She had arrived with a gun, yes, but also with courage, intelligence, and an unshakable spirit. Jack realized that perhaps this was exactly what he needed. Not a gentle bride, but a bold, fearless woman who could share in the hardships and joys of frontier life.
As night fell once more over the prairie, Jack sat by the fire watching the flames dance.
Lila moved about the cabin, organizing supplies and preparing for the coming days. There was a quiet confidence in her every movement, a reminder that she was here to stay and that their lives would be intertwined in ways neither of them could yet fully predict. Jack felt a mixture of anticipation, excitement, and determination. The prairie was wide, wild, and unpredictable, and so was the woman who had arrived at his doorstep. Together, they were about to face whatever challenges lay ahead, side by side, ready to forge a life built on courage, trust, and the untamed spirit of the West. The days on the prairie settled into a rhythm, but for Jack Thompson, life had become anything but predictable.
Lila Kane, the bold and fearless woman who had arrived at his cabin with a gun and a confident smile, was now a constant presence in his daily routine.
At first, Jack had worried that her strong personality and independent nature would clash with his careful ways, but as the days went by, he began to see the advantages of having someone like her by his side. From the moment the sun rose to when it dipped behind the horizon, Jack and Lila worked together on the ranch. Their mornings began early, with the call of the prairie rooster and the soft light of dawn spilling across the hills. Jack would saddle his horse while Lila prepared breakfast over the small wood stove in the cabin. The smell of fresh bread and coffee would fill the air, and they would eat quickly before heading out to tend the cattle. Lila had a way of moving with purpose, her every action deliberate and efficient, but Jack found himself admiring her energy and determination. One morning, as they rode out to check the fences along the northern pasture, Jack realized just how much Lila had adapted to life on the ranch. She handled the horse with ease, guiding it over rough terrain as though she had been born to ride. She noticed a broken fence post from a distance, calling it out before Jack had even spotted it. "We'll need to replace that before the next storm," she said, dismounting gracefully and inspecting the damage. Jack nodded, impressed by her attention to detail. It was clear she wasn't just a visitor. She was a partner in every sense. While Lila adapted quickly to ranch life, she also challenged Jack in ways he had never expected. Her boldness often pushed him out of his comfort zone. One afternoon, as they moved a stubborn herd of cattle toward a new pasture, Lila suggested a faster, riskier route through a narrow ravine. Jack hesitated, worried about the steep sides and loose rocks, but she insisted. "We can do this," she said, her eyes steady. "Trust me." Taking a deep breath, Jack followed her lead, and together they guided the cattle safely through the ravine. The experience left him both exhilarated and grateful. He realized that her courage complemented his caution, creating a balance that made them stronger together.
Evenings at the cabin became a time for conversation and discovery.
By the fire, Jack and Lila would talk about their lives, sharing stories, memories, and dreams. Lila told him about her childhood near the edge of the frontier, about growing up with a family known for their boldness and independence. She spoke of challenges she had faced, of risks she had taken, and of lessons learned through trial and error. Jack listened intently, fascinated by her resilience and strength. Her stories were filled with humor, courage, and a sense of adventure that made the quiet cabin feel alive. Jack in turn shared his own experiences, tales of working the land, of storms survived and cattle saved, and of the solitude that had shaped him. He told Lila about the long nights under the stars, the endless days spent tending the ranch, and the dreams he had carried in his heart for a companion who could share in the hardships and joys of life on the prairie. Lila listened with interest, occasionally teasing him about his seriousness, but always with warmth and curiosity. Through these exchanges, a deep respect began to grow between them. Work on the ranch was never without surprises, and Lila proved to be a valuable ally in times of challenge.
One afternoon, Jack noticed strange hoof prints near the edge of the property.
He paused, studying them carefully, and realized that a herd of wild horses had wandered too close to the cattle. Without hesitation, Lila mounted her horse and took the lead, using her experience and confidence to guide the animals away from danger. Jack followed, amazed by her skill and composure. By the time the herd was safely redirected, he felt a sense of pride and admiration for the woman who had come into his life so unexpectedly. Despite the hard work and occasional dangers, there were moments of quiet joy that reminded them why they had chosen to be together.
On warm afternoons, they would take breaks under the shade of a large oak tree, sharing simple meals of bread, cheese, and fruit.
They would laugh together, teasing one another about small mistakes or missteps, and the sound of their laughter would echo across the open prairie. These moments, though brief, were precious, offering a sense of connection and comfort amidst the demands of frontier life. As the days turned into weeks, Jack began to notice subtle changes in himself. He found himself thinking more about Lila, wondering what she was doing when he was away, and anticipating her presence at the end of the day. Breath. He admired her courage, but more than that, he respected her intelligence, her independence, and the way she embraced life with determination and grace. Lila, in turn, showed signs of growing affection and trust. She began to rely on Jack's judgment, to seek his counsel, and to value his steady presence in a world that was often unpredictable. Their relationship was not without tension, however.
Lila's boldness sometimes clashed with Jack's careful approach, leading to disagreements about the best way to handle tasks or face challenges.
On one occasion, they debated the construction of a new corral, with Lila insisting on a faster, more efficient method, while Jack argued for caution. The discussion grew heated, voices rising in frustration, until they both paused and realized that compromise was necessary. They worked together to combine their approaches, creating a structure that was both strong and practical.
Through moments like these, they learned the value of listening, adjusting, and respecting one another's perspective.
Breaths. As the seasons changed, so too did their understanding of each other. Winter brought cold winds and long nights, testing their endurance and resilience. They would work tirelessly to ensure the animals were fed and sheltered, fires stoked to provide warmth, and fences repaired against the snow.
In these harsh conditions, Lila's fearlessness and quick thinking were invaluable, and Jack's careful planning and steadfastness proved equally important.
Together, they faced the challenges of the season, finding strength in their partnership and comfort in their shared determination. Spring arrived with a burst of color and life. The prairie bloomed with wildflowers, the cattle thrived, and the days grew longer and warmer. Jack and Lila continued their routines, but the beauty of the season brought moments of reflection and joy. They would ride together across the hills, feeling the wind on their faces and the freedom of the open land. They spoke of hopes for the future, of dreams for the ranch, and of the life they wanted to build together. The bond between them grew deeper, rooted in shared experience, mutual respect, and a growing sense of affection. One evening, after a long day of work, Jack and Lila sat outside the cabin, watching the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, a reminder of the vastness and beauty of their world. Jack felt a sense of contentment he had not known in years. Life on the prairie was challenging, but with Lila by his side, it was also full of possibility, adventure, and hope. Lila leaned back, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset, and Jack realized that their partnership had grown into something rare and precious, a connection forged through work, trust, and the willingness to face life's challenges together. In the weeks that followed, Jack and Lila continued to navigate the complexities of ranch life. They learned to anticipate each other's needs, to communicate without words, and to rely on one another in moments of difficulty. They celebrated small victories, the repair of a fence, the safe birth of a calf, or the successful guiding of cattle through a tricky pass. Each success reinforced their bond, strengthening the trust and respect that had begun to develop in the early days of Lila's arrival. The people in the nearby town began to notice the changes as well, and neighbors remarked on the surprising harmony they had achieved. Some had doubted that such a partnership could succeed, but the evidence of their cooperation and mutual respect was undeniable. Jack and Lila were becoming a team, capable of facing the challenges of the prairie and thriving despite the hardships. As the days turned into months, Jack came to realize that his life had changed in ways he could never have imagined. Lila had brought energy, courage, and a sense of adventure that had breathed new life into the ranch. She had arrived with a gun and a fierce independence. But she had also brought loyalty, intelligence, and the capacity for love. Jack understood that the partnership they had built was more than just practical. It was a bond rooted in mutual respect, shared experience, and the willingness to face life together, no matter the obstacles. By the time the first flowers of spring fully bloomed across the prairie, Jack knew that he and Lila had become more than just companions. They had become partners in every sense. The ranch was thriving under their combined efforts, and their days were filled with purpose, challenge, and increasingly, warmth and affection. Life on the prairie was still hard, unpredictable, and at times unforgiving, but together they had found a rhythm, a strength, and a joy that neither could have imagined alone. And so, with the vast prairie stretching endlessly around them, Jack Thompson and Lila Kane began to truly live as partners. They worked, they laughed, they faced challenges, and they discovered the remarkable power of trust, respect, pay. Life on the frontier remained unpredictable, but with each passing day they became more certain that together they could face whatever the prairie and the future might bring. The prairie had always been a place of freedom, but it could also be unpredictable and dangerous. Jack Thompson and Lila Kane had grown accustomed to the rhythm of ranch life, to the daily chores, and to the quiet beauty of the land. Yet one warm spring evening, that calm was suddenly shattered. Jack had been inspecting the fences near the northern pasture when he noticed something unusual. Deep hoof prints in the soft earth led toward the barn, but they were larger than the tracks left by his cattle. His stomach tightened.
Lila, who was helping feed the younger calves, looked up as he called to her.
"Something's not right," Jack said, his voice low but tense. "These aren't our cattle." Lila walked over quickly, her sharp eyes following the tracks.
"I see what you mean," she said, crouching to examine them more closely. "They're fresh, and they don't belong here."
Breath. Someone's been sneaking around.
Her tone was calm but firm, revealing the experience she had gained from a life of vigilance and awareness.
Jack felt a mix of fear and respect. Lila had arrived at his ranch months ago, with a boldness that had surprised him. And now that boldness was exactly what he needed. She picked up a small stone and tossed it lightly into the shadows near the barn, testing the air. "We need to be ready," she said. "I think someone is coming, and I don't believe they mean well." That night, they fortified the cabin as best as they could. Lila checked the locks, placed extra beams on the windows, and made sure their firearms were ready. Jack moved supplies inside and double-checked the barn to ensure the animals were safe. They worked silently, the tension between them unspoken but understood. The prairie, which had seemed so peaceful only hours before, now felt like a place full of hidden threats. By midnight, the wind had shifted, carrying faint sounds across the prairie. Jack strained to listen, heart pounding in his chest. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the subtle crunch of footsteps, the whisper of movement among the trees. Lila's hand rested lightly on the grip of her pistol, her eyes scanning the shadows. "Stay calm," she whispered.
We can handle this if we stay smart.
Jack nodded, silently grateful for her courage and clarity. The next morning, they discovered signs that confirmed their fears.
A fence had been cut on the far side of the property, and a small gate leading to the river had been left open. Someone had been here during the night, scouting the ranch and testing its defenses. Jack felt a wave of anger and worry. "They're getting bolder," he said.
Lila placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Then we'll get smarter."
Des. "We can't let them catch us off guard." For days, they prepared. Lila taught Jack tactics to defend the property and anticipate potential attacks. They hid supplies in secret spots, created lookout points on the hills, and reinforced weak fences.
Lila's experience in handling danger was evident in every decision, every precaution they took. Jack began to see the value of her fearless approach.
She was not reckless. She was practical, clever, and prepared for the worst. Then, one evening, just as the sun began to set, they saw movement at the edge of the property. A small group of men approached cautiously, their faces shadowed, their intentions clear in the way they moved.
Lila whispered for Jack to stay back, then stepped forward to confront them.
"Who are you?" she called, her voice steady and commanding. The men froze, surprised by the boldness of the woman in front of them. "Psst." One of the men stepped forward, a tall figure with a rough face and cold eyes. "We're here for Cain," he said. "We have business with your family." Lila's jaw tightened, but she recognized the name as belonging to an old rival group known for trouble and lawlessness. Jack's heart raced.
He knew that if these men were willing to threaten Lila, their lives and the ranch could be in serious danger. Lila did not flinch.
She stepped closer, keeping her hand on her pistol.
"You won't harm anyone here," she said.
"We are prepared, and we will defend ourselves." The men exchanged glances, unsure if they were facing a weak target or a formidable opponent. Jack, standing behind her, felt a mixture of fear and awe. Lila's confidence was unwavering, and it gave him a sense of calm he had not felt since the first signs of danger appeared. Over the next several hours, tension filled the prairie. The men moved cautiously, testing the boundaries of the property and trying to gauge the strength of their opponents. Lila and Jack remained vigilant, moving silently from one lookout to another, communicating through gestures and subtle signals. They set traps to delay the intruders, created false trails to mislead them, and remained hidden whenever the threat seemed too close. The hours dragged on, each one testing their patience, courage, and ability to work together. Finally, as night fell, the rival men made their move. They attempted to enter the barn under the cover of darkness, hoping to surprise Jack and Lila. But Lila had anticipated this. She was waiting, calm and ready. When the men stepped into the open, she fired a warning shot into the air. The sound echoed across the prairie, startling the intruders and sending them stumbling backwards. Jack followed her lead, drawing his own firearm and positioning himself to support her. Together, they presented a united front that the men had clearly underestimated. The standoff lasted only a few tense minutes, but it felt much longer. Lila's sharp instincts and quick reflexes, combined with Jack's steady hand and careful planning, kept them safe. The men realized that their attempt to intimidate or harm the couple would not succeed. With a mixture of frustration and caution, they retreated into the night, disappearing into the shadows from which they had come. After the danger passed, Jack and Lila stood together, breathing heavily but relieved. The prairie was quiet again, but the experience had left a lasting impression. Jack turned to Lila, admiration and gratitude in his eyes. "I don't know what I would have done without you," he said. Lila smiled, brushing dust from her clothes. "You did well, too," she replied. "We made a good team." For the first time, Jack fully realized the depth of her courage, intelligence, and strength. She had arrived with a gun, yes, but she had also brought protection, skill, and an unshakable spirit that had saved them both. In the days that followed, Jack and Lila worked to repair any damage from the attempted intrusion. They reinforced fences, secured the barn, and kept a careful watch for any signs of trouble. The experience brought them closer together, strengthening their trust and partnership. Jack found that he no longer feared the dangers of the prairie as much, because he knew Lila would face them with him, and he with her. The sense of unity and shared purpose gave him a renewed confidence and a deeper appreciation for her presence in his life. Their neighbors, too, began to take notice.
Rumors of the confrontation spread through the small town nearby. People whispered about the cowboy and the fearless woman who had stood their ground against a group of dangerous men. Some expressed concern, warning Jack to be careful, while others admired the courage and resourcefulness he and Lila had shown. For Jack, the opinions of others mattered less than the growing bond he felt with Lila, a bond strengthened by shared adversity and mutual respect. Evenings at the cabin took on a new significance after the threat. Jack and Lila would sit by the fire, reflecting on the events of the day and discussing plans for the future. They talked about improving security around the ranch, developing strategies to handle any potential danger, and ways to make their lives more comfortable and safe. Lila shared lessons she had learned from her family and experiences, and Jack offered insights from his years of solitary life on the prairie. Together they strategized, planned, and learned from one another, growing stronger as a team. Through it all, Jack began to see Lila in a new light. Her boldness, once intimidating, was now a source of inspiration. Her independence, once challenging, was now a quality he admired and relied upon. He realized that she had not come to his ranch to simply be a companion. She had come to share in the responsibilities, the dangers, and the joys of frontier life. Lila's presence had transformed the ranch, bringing not just protection and skill, but also energy, courage, and a sense of possibility. The experience with the rival men also taught Jack an important lesson about trust and partnership. He had learned that life on the prairie was unpredictable, and that strength and courage were essential for survival. Desperate. Yet he had also learned that facing danger with someone he trusted, someone whose skills complemented his own, made the challenges more manageable and the victories more meaningful. Jack began to understand that Lila was more than just a bold woman with a gun. She was a partner, an equal, and a vital part of his life. As the weeks passed, the threat of the rival gang faded, but the lessons remained. Jack and Lila continued to fortify the ranch, to work together on daily tasks, and to build their partnership through cooperation and mutual respect. Their bond grew stronger, forged not only through shared labor and living, but also through the trials they had faced together. The prairie, with its beauty and unpredictability, had tested them both, and they had emerged stronger, more confident, and more united than ever. By the time spring turned to early summer, Jack knew that he and Lila had developed a partnership that could withstand almost anything. The prairie still held risks, storms, and challenges, but together they were prepared. They had learned to anticipate danger, to act decisively, and to support one another in moments of uncertainty. Their life on the ranch had become a balance of work, vigilance, and quiet joy, strengthened by the trust and courage they shared. And so, as the sun set over the rolling hills of the prairie, Jack and Lila stood together, looking out over their land. The ranch was safe, the cattle secure, and their hearts filled with a sense of accomplishment and unity. The danger they had faced had tested them, but it had also brought them closer, revealing the depth of their courage, the strength of their partnership, and the bond that had begun to form between them. Life on the prairie was still challenging, still unpredictable, but together they were ready to face whatever the future might bring. The prairie was quiet, almost serene, after the recent danger had passed. The sun rose slowly over the rolling hills, painting the land in shades of gold and amber. Jack Thompson sat on the porch of his cabin, sipping his morning coffee, while Lila Kane moved about inside preparing breakfast. There was a sense of calm that had been missing in the days before, but it was a calm earned through effort, courage, and partnership. They had faced danger together, survived, and now the prairie seemed to welcome them with open arms. Jack watched Lila as she carried a basket of fresh bread to the table. Her movements were confident, graceful, and purposeful. He realized how much he had come to depend on her presence, not just for help with the ranch, but for comfort, companionship, and guidance. Life had been lonely before she arrived, but now every day was filled with shared responsibility, laughter, and a growing sense of connection. He smiled, thinking about how far they had come in such a short time.
After breakfast, they saddled their horses and rode out to check the fences along the southern boundary of the ranch. The morning air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of fresh grass and wildflowers. As they rode side by side, Jack felt a sense of peace he had never known before. The land stretched endlessly around them, but he no longer felt the isolation that had once weighed so heavily on him. With Lila by his side, the prairie felt alive, vibrant, and full of possibility.
Their ride was productive.
Lila spotted a weak section of the fence near the creek and suggested reinforcing it with extra posts. Jack nodded, impressed by her attention to detail and practical knowledge. Bah. Together they worked quickly, driving posts into the ground, securing wire, and making sure the cattle would be safe from wandering. The work was hard, but it was also satisfying, and they found joy in the rhythm of labor and in the quiet companionship of shared effort. By mid-afternoon, they took a break under the shade of a large oak tree. Jack poured water from his canteen into 2 cups, handing one to Lila. I sat quietly, listening to the distant sound of the cattle and the gentle rustle of the wind through the grass. Jack felt a surge of gratitude. He thought about how different life had been just months ago, lonely, predictable, and full of quiet longing. Now it was rich, full of challenges, and alive with laughter, conversation, and shared purpose.
Do you ever miss the quiet? Lila asked suddenly, her voice thoughtful.
Jack raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? She smiled. Before all this, before the ranch, before me. Jack considered the question. He realized that while he had cherished the quiet of the prairie, it had felt empty. The solitude had been comforting at times, but it had also left him longing for companionship, for someone who could share in the work, the joy, and even the dangers. He shook his head gently. No, he said. Not anymore. I have you now, Lila smiled, a warmth in her eyes that made Jack's heart race. As the weeks passed, Jack and Lila continued to strengthen their partnership. They faced small challenges, storms that threatened the fences, stubborn cattle that wandered too far, and occasional mechanical failures on equipment, but they met each one together. Lila's quick thinking and courage often saved the day, while Jack's patience, careful planning, and knowledge of the land balanced her boldness.
Their differences, once a source of tension, had become the foundation of a strong, resilient team.
Evenings at the cabin became a time for reflection and shared dreams. They would sit by the fire, talking quietly about the future, imagining improvements to the ranch, and laughing about the mishaps of the day. Sometimes they would reminisce about the moment they first met, recalling the surprise, confusion, and uncertainty of that day. Jack often thought about how he had expected a gentle, timid woman, and instead had received someone who was bold, fearless, and entirely unexpected. Despair. Yet now, he could not imagine life any other way. One afternoon, while checking the northern pasture, they encountered a small herd of wild deer grazing near the edge of the trees. Lila stopped her horse, pointing silently. Jack followed her gaze, and for a moment they both watched the deer, marveling at the quiet beauty of the prairie. It was in these moments, when work paused and the world seemed to stand still, that they felt the strongest connection. The land, the animals, and each other created a sense of balance and belonging that neither had experienced before. As summer approached, the ranch thrived. The fences were strong, the cattle were healthy, and the cabin had been improved to withstand storms and cold nights. Jack and Lila had worked tirelessly, and their efforts had created a home filled with warmth, safety, and life. The challenges of frontier living had tested them, but they had faced each one together, emerging stronger and more united. Jack felt pride not just in the ranch, but in the partnership he and Lila had forged through shared labor, trust, and courage. Their relationship deepened in subtle but meaningful ways.
Jack noticed the way Lila's eyes softened when she looked at him, how she would occasionally brush a strand of hair from her face with a thoughtful smile. Lila saw the quiet strength in Jack, the way he approached work and life with care and determination, and the way he valued her skills and opinions. First, their bond was no longer just practical. It was emotional, built on respect, admiration, and a growing affection that neither could deny. One evening, as the sun began to set in brilliant shades of orange and purple, they sat together on the porch, watching the prairie glow in the fading light. Jack reached over and took Lila's hand. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset, and he felt a rush of emotion he could not put into words. "Lila," he said softly, "I never imagined life could be like this. You've made this place feel like home in ways I never thought possible." Lila squeezed his hand gently.
"And you've shown me that strength and courage can be gentle too," she replied.
"We've built this life together, Jack, and I wouldn't want it any other way." The days continued in this rhythm. Work, shared tasks, quiet reflection, and moments of joy, celebration. They planted a small vegetable garden near the cabin, added a few new chickens to the coop, and worked on expanding the barn to store more hay. Every task was a collaboration, every success a reminder of their partnership. They discovered that life on the prairie was not just about survival. It was about creating something lasting, meaningful, and filled with love. The seasons changed, bringing new challenges and new beauty. Painted the prairie in reds, oranges, and golds, while winter brought cold winds and snow that blanketed the land.
Jack and Lila faced each season with resilience, learning from each challenge and celebrating each small victory.
They continued to grow together, learning more about each other with every passing day. Their partnership had become the heart of their lives, a source of strength, comfort, and joy that neither had expected when their paths first crossed. Neighbors began to notice the remarkable change. The stories of Jack and Lila, how they had survived danger, worked tirelessly on the ranch, and built a life together, spread through the small town. Some admired their courage, others were curious about their unique partnership, and a few even sought their advice on handling the hardships of frontier life. Jack and Lila remained humble, focused on their work and on each other, knowing that their greatest achievement was the life they had created together. One spring morning, as they walked through the pastures checking on the cattle, Lila paused and looked out over the land. "Look at this, Jack," she said. "All of this, we did it together." Jack followed her gaze, seeing the fences, the fields, and the healthy herd thriving under their care. He nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction and pride. "Yes, we did," he said. "And it's only the beginning. The prairie has more to give, and so do we." By the time the sun set, painting the sky with the last golden rays of the day, Jack and Lila had come to understand the true meaning of partnership. Life on the prairie was not easy, but it was rich, full of challenge, and filled with opportunities to grow, to love, and to create something lasting. They had faced loneliness, fear, and danger, yet they had emerged stronger, more connected, and more certain of their place in the world and in each other's lives. Jack realized that he had not only found a partner in Lila, he had found a friend, a confidant, and a soulmate, Bill. Lila, in turn, understood that Jack was not just a companion in work, but a steady presence in life, someone she could rely on in every situation, someone who respected and valued her strength and spirit. Together, they had created a life that was balanced, resilient, and full of hope. As the stars appeared overhead, twinkling like tiny lights across the vast prairie, Jack and Lila sat by the fire outside the cabin. They held hands, sharing a quiet moment of reflection. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, but it no longer felt empty. It was filled with life, laughter, courage, and love, the results of months of effort, partnership, and shared determination.
Jack squeezed Lila's hand gently, and she smiled, a warmth that matched the glow of the fire.
Here's to us, Jack said softly. Lila nodded.
Here's to the life we've built, she replied. And together they looked out over the prairie, confident in their partnership, ready to face whatever the future might bring, and grateful for the unexpected journey that had brought them together.